Well, welcome. Uh, we may have some others joining us, uh, signing in. I know that Megan Hobbick was having to deal with a sick child this morning, so I know she was planning to be with us. And my experience with Zoom calls is that sometimes it takes a few extra minutes for everybody to get signed on. But we'll go ahead and get started. I'm so thankful that you were able to make some time for us to talk about what I think is a really important book, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. I also think it's important for our walk as followers of Jesus and for our spiritual formation. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation and to our sharing. I want you to feel free to interrupt me if you have a comment or a question. This is for the benefit of us all in terms of discussion. So we also want to especially welcome Dr. Sam Moore with us. Sam, most of you know and love Sam because he has been your superintendent in the Uwharrie district. He's now serving as the Yadkin Valley superintendent, and just so thankful that he is with us today. So welcome, Sam. So let's begin with a prayer, and then we will have some introductions. Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, you indeed are present with us. We give you thanks for how your presence gives us strength, how your presence guides us, and how your love, your abundant love, how it nourishes us. Lord, be with us in this time of contemplation and pondering, reflecting and thinking together. Lord, continue to shape our hearts, our lives, after the likeness of your Son, our Savior, Jesus. It is in his name that we pray. Amen. So let's quickly, well, not quickly, quickly share your name, but maybe not so quickly, simply share perhaps one idea, one image, or one idea, one story that stood out to you from the book. And if by chance you have not read the book, that's okay. You're going to be able to participate in the conversation. But you can just say, I'm going to pass on sharing an idea or story that stood out for you. So I'll begin just so that you can be thinking about what that would be for you. I think everybody knows me. I'm Laura Auten, the superintendent and missional strategist for Uwharrie District. And I have read, the first time I encountered this book was a book on tape. So I heard it and then I read it, and I learned something in both of those hearing and reading, in both of those times, I learned something new. It was really, I think, an idea that stands out to me is, would it make a difference? Does it make a difference to speak and think in terms of caste instead of race? And what are the implications of that? What are the consequences of that? What are the pros and cons of that? And she addresses that in the book. And so I hope to learn from others about that. Is it the difference between thinking about this in terms of caste or race? So that's an idea that stands out for me. So who would like to go next? Nobody wants to go next. Santos.
I'm Santos Nirola, currently serving 2-point charge, Mount Moriah and Fountain Hill. And I would like to pass the idea from the book.
Okay. We know some of the other things you've been busy working on these days, Santos.
Yes,
Board of Ministry papers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're glad you're here, Santos.
Thank you.
Jill?
I'll go. And I cannot, I have to own all my books because I write in them, highlight. So I used a red pen for this one and it's all over the book. So there's so much to absorb from it all.
Tell us where you're serving. Tell us where you're serving, Jill.
Sorry. I am in an extension ministry called Flourishing Souls, where I pair contemplative prayer for closeness to God and the Enneagram to know oneself for an awakening to life. And I'm based out of Salisbury still. So, but so much is by Zoom nowadays. So
yeah,
that's good. But when you asked about a particular scene in the book, and the one, because it was toward the end, that just, it left me so unsettled for lots of reasons, was when she was talking about her personal experience of being on the plane and how people didn't expect her to be in first class. That was disturbing enough. But then when she was trying to get off the plane and the man was getting a bag for someone else or his bag and just leaning into her, to me, that just evoked so much. It was just such a visual of pushing against someone and not even recognizing and not acknowledging there's a person there.
Yeah, that was a powerful story. Yeah.
I agree. I just want to say about the caste versus racism. I learned a lot from the way Abram Kendi talks about how to look at racism in a new way. But for her to say racism is more individual, and so it's not helping us to use that word. So to use, caste as the overall system, it seems like a good way to start addressing it from another vantage point.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. Thank you. Gwen?
Yeah, I'm going to pretty pass on the book. I have the book and I have started reading part of it, but I have not finished it because I get to a point where I get discouraged and I just have to put it down. I guess I have a interest being involved in a lot of different things on boards and trying to move the work forward in different areas, whether it's in the church, serve on the school board, serving Partnership for Children, and doing different things in the community. I want to see us move forward. And I find myself being discouraged, trying to find a way to approach different topics and different areas in order to start conversation that's going to move us forward. So I guess I'm here because I'm struggling with having those conversations and how to have those conversations and how not to cause other people not to want to move forward, I guess. So you understand what I'm trying to say? I hope you do, but I've read different parts of the book, but I haven't gone through the entire book.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I am.
Yeah. Gwen, we're so glad that you're here. And Gwen is at St. Luke in Ashboro. So we're glad you're here. All right, who's next?
Katie Lineburger. I'm the Vitality Associate for our district. And I have had the book on my nightstand for over a year, and I read about half of it last year. And I'm sorry to say I need to pass on the second part. I need to go back and visit it. I'm really glad to be a part of this conversation and look forward to it getting me motivated and energized to pick it back up and finish it from when I started it last year. But I remember just being riveted by and convicted and just in so many, and eyes open in so many ways about the way it talks about race and the comparison of a caste system. It's just mind-blowing. So I'm really looking forward to being a part of this conversation.
Oh,
Well, I'm Chris Mars. I am the Missional Engagement Associate in the Uwharrie District. And there are several stories that stuck with me and stick with me. Yesterday, I was doing some reading. I was sitting at my daughter's volleyball tournament. And so there's noise and people all around. And I was having to hold in tears and nausea as I was reading. One of the stories in particular that affected me reading it yesterday was one of my daughter rides horses, and to hear the story of Andrew Jackson using a bridle, which is the piece, if you don't know, a bridle is over, the head of the horse and holds the bit in the mouth. And that's what you use to direct the horse and steer the horse. Using a bridle made of the skin of indigenous people. Just, it's inconceivable to me, inconceivable. So.
thank you, Chris. Sam, was there any one thing that has stood out to you, or anything you'd like to share about as you've read through the book?
And I would say the one thing that I will share is that when she told the story of Martin Luther King Jr. going to India and being introduced as an undesirable in America, and that how maybe he pushed back from that because he had not thought of himself in that system. And I guess that would also be, it was enlightening. The parts that I've not completed the book, but the parts that I've read, it has enlightened me. And it has made me look at racism in the United States in a different light. Also, to understand that as an African American, that I've also been discriminated against from African Americans, and that it's greater than race. Okay, but I think that race is the beginning of it. But there are other ways that we mistreat people based on who they are, where they are from, and things of that nature. But that does not I'm not trying to minimize or say that the United States has a serious problem in regards to race, and that I celebrate that the United Methodist Church has made the elimination of racism one of its goals during this quadrennium. And my hope and prayer is that it's going to take more than 4 years. And that the United Methodist Church will continue to be bold no matter how much pushback it receives, to make it an emphasis until it is eliminated. That the United Methodist Church, the leadership will attack it with the same fervor that they did with the initiative of eliminating nothing but nets. That was the emphasis a few years ago. And I just hope that the same efforts are applied to this, if not greater.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you. I want us to look now at one of the quotations. I'm going to do a screen share. This was on page 380. And the author says, the goal of this work has not been to resolve all of the problems of a millennia-old phenomenon, but to cast a light onto its history, its consequences, and its presence in our everyday lives and to express hope for its resolution. So I want you to take a moment to look at that quotation and maybe think about what some of the important words are in that. And then our question is, did the author meet her goal in this work? And if so, how?
Can I say that I appreciate Gwen sharing she had to put the book down and then come back to it, because I did the same thing. I got out Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ to counter because with this quote, well, I just found it so depressing to read. I didn't find any hope in the book. I kept waiting to get to the very end to find out what she was offering. And this kind of sums up what she was offering. She wasn't trying to give solutions. She was just trying to say, here's how she sees it. So now it's up to us individually to decide how to live.
Mm.
So I found reading through it hopeless isn't quite the right word. But it was so depressing because there were, and maybe she was effective in doing this. She didn't give any alternative experiences that were hopeful. So she was really just showing this is a lot of what people deal with. And I get that. So I don't know if it's just my personality where I just wanted, I wanted a few solutions or suggestions along the way, and she didn't give them. And so it really was just the last couple of pages. And I forced myself to go through it because I knew this discussion was coming. So, but it was rough. It was rough reading. And I don't know whether I want some glimmers of hope throughout it, to just absolve myself for where I've been complicit in some of these actions.
Mm. One word that it makes me think of is diagnosis. There was almost a sense of her diagnosing what is true and what is real. And I interrupted you. Go ahead, Jill.
That's right. My only thought was she didn't address spirituality in it. And for me, that's kind of the hope of where we go. So even it's almost some of the times when she said some of the Black persons were forgiving whites for some horrific thing, it's almost as if that was a sign of the caste system, whereas like, well, I think that's what we're supposed to do, and it shouldn't be just one class of people or another. So I struggled with not being able to pull that out of what she was offering.
Mm.
I'm going to say, Jill, I guess it sort of forces us, because we're sometimes looking for someone else to give us the solution to a problem.
Mm.
And what I found is really it's going to take each one of us to examine our own hearts to find out where we are individually on issues, whether it's a caste or race, and then how are we going to use what we know is the right thing in our hearts? How are we going to use that to bring to the table to help find solutions? So it's like he was talking about, I think somewhere about the inspector that inspects a house. And when he inspects the house, he's going to tell you what's wrong with the house, but he's not going to fix the house.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets to take each one of us, if I examine my heart, my own spirituality. See, where am I in my, how do I approach other people? How do I react to other people? How do I try to cause change when change need to be? So I think it sort of forces us to take a look at our own selves and see where we are. That's my interpretation.
It definitely did that, but I can also get discouraged that I'm just, the
I
one
know.
person.
Yeah, right.
Um,
That's it right there. Yeah, you only one person. Yeah.
Mhm. Any other thoughts on that quotation on whether she met her goal? Santos, were you going to say something?
I didn't read the book, but I was just, when I read that sentence about history, enlightenment for the history and consequences and its purpose today, and the expression of hope for its resolution. And when I was reading that sentence, my mind went back to my advanced church history class. Last year, I was privileged to take that class, and in the history 1844 or so, when the Methodist Episcopal Church, and there was a lot of, I saw, just to make it short, I saw a lot of discrimination within the church, and a lot of racism, and even the Black folks had to, they were penalized, or they were just, even when they were praying in the church, they were cast out, and they had to pay for even for the worship, all those things. But when in 1900, during that time when the revolution came, but even at that change, the new world time, the new opportunities were there, and we were more engaging in social work and new evangelism and all those things. But deep down there, the main problem was still there. That was not solved, but we were just skipping that, and then we were focusing on other things just to make in our heart, to satisfy our heart, that by doing this, maybe that will be resolved by itself. But it didn't. The main thing was still there. And because of that, many groupism formed, and many benefits, many positive and negative thoughts, negative thing came. But even in that time, the jurisdiction, the segregation, and the separate jurisdiction was there. But just to make it short, I'm from also the same, I'm from Nepal, and India and Nepal, the caste system is lot. I have experienced that. I'm from the higher class, just so-called higher class. I'm born, but just because I became a Christian, people treated me as like untouchable now. I'm outcast because of being a Christian, and a lot of things I have experienced, and I have seen people suffer still. Just to make short, but how we express our hope for the resolution, or its presence today is, I really appreciate, as Sam said earlier, I appreciate in the United Methodist Church, at least we have a voice, we have a space, and it's changing. But I also fear sometimes, just to be honest, like in those past year, like focusing so many areas, but not coming to the proper resolution. Maybe sometimes it will still go on, it will carry on that thing. That's my fear. Maybe we cannot, we may not be able to 100% bring the resolution right away and it will go on. But still there are so many changes that I celebrate, and I praise God for what we could able to achieve in the United Methodist Church.
Thank you for those reflections. Anything else about the quote there? I don't want to move on too quickly. Anything else?
I sort of want to ask, is it Santosh, a question? I think my question, and I'm trying to phrase it, I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but it might mean something to me. When you said you were born into a class, I mean the upper caste in India. And
In
then,
Nepal.
in Nepal, I'm sorry, in Nepal.
All right.
But when you became a Christian, you were determined an outcast.
Yes, ma'am.
So you went from a higher caste to a lower caste. Is that correct?
Yes, technically it's now changed. Society is changing, but still the Hindu it is against the constitutions to discriminate it now, because there was 10 years ago it was declared as a secular state in Nepal. But before that, it was considered as an illegal practice for Christianity in Nepal. And there are a lot of stories that I can share regarding discrimination and caste systems that I have seen and witnessed. But yes, my father, my grandfather, they suffered a lot just because of being a Christian. From their society, from the community. I didn't suffer as much as they suffer, because the society was changing and they could not able to discriminate me like they did to my fathers and my grandfather. But still I have witnessed, I have stories that I directly confronted, I was accused, I was mistreated, badly treated, just because of I'm Christian. Though I am high caste, though I born and raised up, I'm inborn high caste, just so-called. I don't, and even inside the Christianity, just it is so much dominant in our society, in the community back Nepal and India, that even in the Christianity, it is not gone. Theoretically, we say we are all same. There is no Jew, no Gentile, no Greeks, no all same. But in practical, when it comes into the marriage, when it comes into the other things, especially in the marriage, I still, at present, right now, I still see that discrimination, even within the even within the Christianity.
Thank you.
Santosh, she said in the book, caste trumps culture. So even if someone from India was to leave and get an education, socially they would be equal to a lot of people, but when they went back to India, they were considered untouchables. That the caste was always the predominant thing, and you just kind of confirmed that the faith in the faith community as well.
Right. They were accused. The Christianity were blamed and accused. It was without any proper source, or it was not true, but they were accusing, like, Christianity is a beef eater because they worship one of the goddesses cow. That's holy cow they worship, and that's beef eater religion. That's against the culture. Woman catcher, they were just influenced with the movie Bollywood, Hollywood movies and all those, and then they think like all the Westerners are perverse, so they are women catchers. This is the women catcher religion. And another thing they accused us is like, it is the religion of untouchable. That means there are four things, like the higher caste is from the head of the Brahma, that is God. And then another caste is from the chest. another caste is from the thigh, and another caste is emerged from the feet. But the untouchable is neither belong to any of that part. That is not from the God that belongs. So that means if I touch the water, they will not consider that water drinkable. They will throw that water away because even they will see that water is contaminated. But there are a lot of things. Yes, and I agree what you said. It affects whole lifestyle, whole our living and culture.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask Sam now to kind of share out of his experience. And he and I had talked earlier about this, and almost as a witness. Sam, I'm going to stop trying to introduce this part and just I'm going to hush and let you talk. Let you begin.
Okay. Part of my story, part of my witness is that I am fourth generation Methodist. My great grandfather left the Baptist church when the Methodist revival came to our community, and he and some other men mostly left the Baptist church, where he was kind of one of the prominent leaders. He had donated land to that Baptist church for the community school for African Americans. And they founded the Methodist church that was 1.5 miles maybe, well, up the road and to the left is where the Methodist church was built. My great grandfather was a former slave. He and his other two brothers bought 100 acres of land, and that land is still in our family. The descendants of one of the brothers lost their land, and a sawmill bought it. And so we had a sawmill in our community for the majority of my life. My cousin whose house was beside the sawmill, that her sons, they became successful, became engineers, and they bought that land back and put it back in the family with the understanding that, you know, it's family land. It's back where it belongs. My great grandfather was a farmer. He had 3 sons. 2 of those sons, one was a physician. The legend is that the other one was a preacher, a lawyer, and a physician. He did not have any children. And when he died, he gave his land to my aunt. The other uncle, the great uncle, who was a physician, he worked his way on the railroad, went to Shaw University, Shaw College, became a physician, met and married a lady that was a student at Palmer Institute outside of Greensboro. And they relocated to St. Louis. And he was a primary care physician in St. Louis. I remember him. They had a summer house that they built that was across from our house. And he and his family would come and spend several weeks, sometimes even a month in Reesville. And he died in 1966. My father, my grandfather died when my father was 7 years old. And my grandfather was the farmer. He was there to farm the land. My father was 7 years old. There was a large family, and it was decided that my father would be the one who would have to leave the house. And a cousin reared him. And this cousin taught him how to work and the importance of work. And so from 7 years old until 62 years old, my father worked. He worked 2, 3 jobs at a time. My father told me the story and told all of us the story that when World War II started and the draft started, that he was driving for a white man and also working at one of the prominent employers in Rockingham County, which was American Tobacco Company. And that the white man to whom he was a chauffeur said, "I got pulled and I can get you out of the draft." And my father said that he thought about it and he said that if this happens, he would always be beholden to him. So he said, let me be a part of the draft. And so my father was drafted. He served in World War II. He was stationed in Europe. He also told us that coming back from the war, that they rode the ship. The ship brought him back to the United States, to Delaware. They took the bus from Delaware and they pulled into Richmond. And when they pulled into Richmond, on that particular bus, they could sit anywhere they wanted to sit. When the driver came in Richmond, the driver said, "I don't care where you ends have been, what you're wearing, or what you have encountered, you know your place." And they had to get to the back of the bus. And he was wearing the uniform of the United States of America. My father was my hero. My father, as I said, worked his entire life. Because he was a veteran, when he came back, he was able to get his job back at American Tobacco Company. And he spent the majority of his career working menial jobs. He was not able to work the jobs that manufactured the cigarettes until maybe the last 10, 12 years of his career. He was able to get me hired at American Tobacco Company. And I remember when I was hired that there was something that was called black money that they were going to give to African-American employees who had been discriminated against. And so my father and many of his colleagues were able to get some money to make up for that. But that money did not amount to what it should have been, and it did not make up for all the years that he was mistreated as an African American. I remember going with him as he paid back loans to the companies that charged exorbitant interest rates because he was not able to get a loan at one of the banks. And also, in order to get a loan from one of the banks, he would have to mortgage most of his land, which was not a possibility. As I think about the church, I remember taking Black church studies in America at Duke. And it was there that I really heard and learned of the stories of the AMEs, the AME Zions and the CMEs. And I remember riding home every day after one of those lectures saying, if I get to heaven and I see my great grandfather, I'm going to ask him, why in the world did he and those other leaders lead that Baptist church where they had some semblance of personhood and join a denomination that didn't really want them? And I think the one that really got away with me was when the lecture was given on the CMEs, and that it was basically the Southern Church said, we don't want you anymore. And so just leave. And we will give you the bishops and the leadership that you need in order that you can be organized. But you just leave our denomination. And then in 1939, when there was the Methodist Church coming into existence, and that my father and his parents, but his father was dead, but that generation was not even thought enough of to be put into the jurisdiction in which they resided, but they were all put in the central jurisdiction. And I remember in 1968, when the creation of the United Methodist Church happened, I remember all that my father and my parents endured. My mother was a domestic. My grandmother, even though she had children, she had to help raise white children. And those white children called her by her first name, even though she was old enough to be their grandmother. As I look at our church now, I carry a different burden than Laura and the other members of the cabinet. Mine is that, I've been a district superintendent before. And I also, when I left Urari, I went to Hickory Grove, which was a primarily Anglo congregation. But let me go back. I digress. Let me say that the burden that I carry is that it's not only me that sit at the cabinet table, it's my ancestors. And not only is it my ancestors, it's the possibility of others who follow. The responsibility is that I do the work. And I put the pressure on myself that I do it to the very best of my ability, so that no one can ever say, we have had an African American and Sam was that African American and he didn't live up to expectation. That gets me back to the appointment that I served after I left Urari. It was Hickory Grove in Charlotte. Used to ride by the church on my way to the conference center. And used to see the church and say, wonder what it would feel like to pastor that church, never knowing that one day I would be the pastor of it. And Hickory Grove is a multi-ethnic church. When I arrived, there was Africans, Liberians who were there. There were Anglos who were there. There were Latinos who were there. and basically, they were all sharing space and we're doing a very good job of doing that. And so part of my focus on the time that I was there was to preach and to teach that we are all beloved children of God, persons of worth created in the image of God. And also to come to the understanding that we needed to get to know one another. We needed to have diverse leaders in all of our leadership teams. And we needed to have mutual respect and mutual love for one another. And that was what I pushed. I will end this by saying that the first day I went to the office at Hickory Grove, I used the credentials that had been given to me so that I could sign on to the computer. And when I signed on to the computer, the majority of the letters that had been written and emails that had been written to my predecessor showing their love and support for him and how he had been done wrong came up on the screen. And also that, I was only being appointed there because there was nowhere else for me to go. I was only going to be there until the cabinet found me somewhere else to go. And that one was even so bold to say, I'm leaving this church. I'm not going to have anything else to do with this church. And so if anyone want to know why I'm leaving, they can ask me. And I quit reading after that one because I said, if I continue to read these emails and letters, I will not trust anybody. I will not do ministry for anybody. And this appointment will only last for 6 months. However, I bought a laptop in January of the following year. And when I bought the laptop, I connected to the server. And guess what? All of these emails show up right when I connect to the server. And I still was determined I was not going to read them when they showed up. I did read them, and the reason that I did read them would be whenever I would start searching for something, and I would put in that information in the search engine, it would take me back to them. Some of the leaders of that church that were also some of my leaders had written some of these emails. I had to determine how I would treat them. And I will also say that when I arrived at Hickory Grove, I spent the first month going to Sunday school classes because that was where most of the mission and ministry happened, would be through Sunday school classes, and just share with them my hopes and dreams for the church. And I remember that the Sunday school class that my wife joined, it was probably the last one that I visited. And as I went to that class, they said, we used to be one of the larger classes in the church, but they all left. And they went, and this is the crazy part. They went to the United Methodist churches that were in the community. Now, if I was upset, I wouldn't go to another United Methodist church. I would go to another denomination, but they went to the United Methodist churches in the community. And some of them, they waited and they would not transfer their membership until January 1 of the following year, because they did not want it to reflect upon my predecessor, but they wanted it to reflect upon me. The end is just to say that not only did I preach and teach that we were all beloved children of God, I also made it a point that pastoral care would be one of the ways that I would win that congregation over. And so while I was there, whenever they had surgeries, I was there. I prayed for them the night before surgery in case I was late getting there for the surgery. And I was there that morning before they went into surgery. And word got around. I developed leadership. I developed a visitation team that was made up of 2 people each that would visit all the sick and shut-ins, and they chose who it was they wanted to visit. And they would visit at least monthly. And when they visited, they would carry consecrated communion elements. They would take a newsletter. They would take a CD of the 4 worship services. They would take the upper room. For those that did not have CD players, the church bought them CD players. And the commitment was that if any on the visitation team saw that someone needed a visit from me, they were to tell me. And I would make it my priority to go visit them. Like most pastors, someone called at 3 o'clock in the morning, say somebody's dying or has died, I would get out the bed, put on my clothes, and I would be there. When we announced that we were coming to the Yadkin Valley District, the ones that remained, well, some of them even told me that we will go and we will fight so you can stay here. And I had to tell them, no, don't do that. We don't do that. And they looked at me kind of cross-eyed like, well, you just want to follow the rules. And I said, well, listen, it's to my benefit that I moved. It's more money. I'm driving an hour and a half to care about my special needs sister. And when my other sister was dying, you all knew that Marvin and I, we had to drive that distance. Plus she has 2 sisters who had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And so it's to our advantage to be 45 minutes from home versus an hour and 30 minutes. When we left Hickory Grove, we had a drive-through parade. This was the only church in 30-some years of ministry where everyone who came to see us was crying that we were leaving. So that's part of my story. And so I will stop.
Wow, Sam, you have blessed us by sharing your story and by your witness. I wonder if we just kind of pause, and if there's something that's kind of rising to the surface of your thoughts in terms of a question or a reflection that others of you might ask Sam or share with Sam. Is there anything that's kind of surfacing for you in what he has shared?
I'm curious, during that transition and the initial, time at that church, how were the clergy area, particularly the white clergy, how were they allies you, or how maybe did you need them to be allies and supportive and you didn't get that?
And it was not, a good job was not done to prepare the way for me to come to that church. The transition was not handled in a good way. I met with the staff parish before the appointment was announced. And we talked. And as we talked, staff parish was on board. And staff parish was affirming. However, because that was all that was done, the congregation had not been prepared for my coming. And so when it was announced on Announcement Sunday that I was coming, that I was African American, which I was that first African American pastor, what do you expect? But the cabinet, we do a better job now of preparing for that. And as a pastor, the best thing that you can do in any time is to be as supportive of that colleague who is coming as possible. To say that when people come and say, I hate to see you go, and do you want, what can we do to keep you here, is to say, that's not the way we work. And it's time for me to go. Even if you don't want to go, to say it's time for me to go. And that what I did when it was time for us to go, I was reading a statement a few weeks ago that I read as I announced that it was going to be put on the website that I was going to be the Yadkin Valley District Superintendent. I said in that statement, the way that you can honor the ministry that Marva and I have shared with you is to give your new pastor all the support that you possibly can. That's the best way to honor us, is to accept your new pastor and support him or her to the very best of your ability. So I think statements like that as you're going out, even if you don't mean it, to make it and as best as you can to live into it, and to believe that, to believe that as you go to that next place, God's gonna be there, and you're gonna have a fruitful, faithful, and effective ministry there.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Anything else before we kind of switch gears and back at the, anything else? One of the things that I think most people talk about when they talk about this book, Caste, is how the words, or in the comparisons and the words that she uses to describe what was going on in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s, and the racism as experienced in the United States, the differences and yet the similarities and the connections there. It's very, very sobering, perhaps even nauseating, to think about how, I know in one place in particular, there's a reference to how people in Germany looked at the system of American slavery for how to do this. That's almost hard to say that, even to say those words. That was particularly difficult in the chapter called The Evil of Silence. And it was part of a larger conversation where she was asking about if this was something that we were able to talk about and to solve. And the quotation on page 385, I think, summarizes that. It's 385, where she says the persistence of caste and race hostility and the defensiveness about anti-Black sentiment in particular make it literally unspeakable to many in the dominant caste. You cannot solve anything that you do not admit exist, which could be why some people may not want to talk about it. And that kind of gets to our earlier conversation about as her purpose in simply identifying and diagnosing the reality of this, that this exists. And then she goes on to say, which could be why some people may not want to talk about it. It might get solved. To me, that was a really powerful statement. And so I think the question that would be before us with that is, do you think our society wants to solve the problems of caste and race hostility? And what are ways that people try to stop the conversation? What are ways that people try to stop the conversation?
I mean, for me, when I think about this question, I think it's kind of split, right? Like, I think there are people in the world that do want to solve this problem. I think, like, we took a group of students to the
Megan,
yeah.
I want to have you just introduce yourself real quick before you go any further. We're so glad.
I'm sorry, my son has been sick, and he now has a sinus and ear infection on top of his virus, so that is why I'm late today.
It's okay. We're glad you're with us, but
so I'm Megan. I'm the chaplain over at Pfeiffer. That's who I am. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm sorry I'm late. But anyway, we took people to the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. Took students there, and like, that's one way that I think, yeah, telling the truth about history is really impactful and does make a difference. I know it did or my students. But on the same regard, like that's one end of the spectrum. On the other, you have people trying to like take critical race theory and things like that out of schools, because I think there's this, you know, there's this not want, because people don't want to face history. They don't want to face the truth, and they want power structures to stay the same.
One thing I got out of the very end of her book, where she said she saw hope that things could change because of what happened in Nazi Germany. Because to hear about initially, you bristle to think we're compared to them, but she gives plenty of examples of terrible treatment of individuals. But because they were so ashamed of it, rightfully so, they dismantled it, you know, and they don't allow statues in their country of anything from that time frame, or swastikas. And I just thought it was wildly ironic that that could be our hope, because they did see what it was and were willing to acknowledge that. And that's the difference I see in our country. And she named it at the end of the book, that if you're not it's the first step for AA. You have to acknowledge the problem. And too many, I think, in our country don't want to acknowledge that it was there, it's in the past, let's pretend it didn't happen. But until you take steps like South Africa did to name it, to feel the pain of it, to acknowledge it, you won't stop doing that. And I hope our country can get to the point to name it and own up to it, so that we don't keep perpetuating it. But I'm not, I don't know how we teach that to others. How do we help collectively form the groups? Megan said there's so many people that do want this work to happen. How do we collate that group?
Yeah, others?
I think part of your question, Laura, was how do people sort of shut down the conversation? Did I hear that? So one thing I hear frequently is, well, I'm just colorblind. I treat everybody the same. And I think that's one thing that people sometimes say, to not have to talk anymore about the way people are not treated the same and haven't been treated the same, and how that has set up a system that has disadvantaged groups of people. And I think people who say that come out of a place of, like, they want to think that they're doing good and saying something good by saying, I treat everybody the same, I'm colorblind. And maybe they're not wanting to reflect deeper or beyond that statement.
I think that's one of the problems we have when we talk about equity. Because if you say you treat everybody the same, you really don't see me. You're making me invisible. So if we're looking at Chris, they're looking at you, and they're looking at me, and they're saying they treat us both the same, even though what you need is totally different from what I need. But they're not willing to look at me and find out what I need. They're just going to give us both the same thing. But our needs are not the same. Our experiences are not the same. So when you look at me and say, I don't see color, then you're not treating me as an individual. You're just throwing me in the same bag with everybody else, just to make it easier to do whatever it is you want to do. So that's one of the issues, as being on the school board, being a former teacher. These things, you can't, I mean, everybody don't need the same thing. So why are we going to treat everybody the same? That's okay. Yes, we want to respect everybody, but give each one what they need in order to be successful, whether that's in church or whether that's in school or wherever. I think we need different things because we have different experiences.
I also feel like saying like you're colorblind, like I think that's like dehumanizing. Like, I mean, to like take it a step further in a way, and I think it negates somebody's like being created in the image of God, right? Like as do you go by Gwen or Gwendolyn?
How about Gwen? Gwen.
Like as Gwen was saying, I mean, I think, you know, to put like a theological point on it, like it really like it negates somebody's humanness and their belovedness. Like I feel like it's, you know, like a microaggression in a way, so that you don't have to deal with history and what's gone on in our country.
Right, that's the way I see it too.
And also,
Yeah.
I'd like to add there, I see it's like, we didn't have to think a lot. It's like just from as a color person, I have to think twice. But as a privileged people, I don't have to even think about it because I'm there. I'm so rooted that I didn't see anything. I didn't have to think about anything about it. But for me, I have to think twice or thrice even before act or think or say something.
And I think there's a level of ignorance that people are comfortable with. Because if I don't know, I don't have to wrestle with it or deal with it or feel those things. Once I'm no longer ignorant, whatever the particular, you know, topic is or issue or part of an issue, when I'm no longer ignorant, I no longer have an excuse. But if I can stay ignorant, I have a bit of well, I just didn't know. I just know. Yeah. And I think that's my ongoing, at least for me, ongoing thing that I wrestle with is how ignorant I have been about so many things, having grown up in a very whitewashed tree. So ignorance is bliss, right?
Or not. Or not. I think
that
another
point-
way we shut down the conversation is when we point to token examples. We'll say, well, there's a cross-racial appointment in this area, in this district, or here's a person of color that's in this position of power. You know, we point to that, and that then as if that justifies what we're doing or ends the conversation.
Yeah, and I mean,
I have a friend, my neighbor's black, or, you know, that kind of thing too.
And that's using like we're talking about, and I mean, that's what she's getting at. It's a systemic problem, but we use individual examples to try to like squash it, which I don't know what you would call that, but I mean, it's a particular type of squash. And it's hard because we live in such an individualistic culture to like navigate that. And people don't want to hear about systemic things.
I guess I'm struggling with, and Laura, I really need some help. You or Sam maybe can help me beside praying for me. I'm struggling with being, and you know, if you say you are evangelical, then how can you not, if we are Christians and we know that God created us in his image and that he doesn't care any more about the lowly than he does of the highly, whatever, about the caste. We are all children of God. So if you look at me as a child of God, then why would you think I was less than you? Or why would you not value me as much as you would another person? Because we are all children of God. He created all of us in his image. He loves all of us equally. And he looks at our heart instead of the color of our skin. So why are you being, I guess, why would an evangelical be complicit in doing things that are totally against what God would want?
Excellent question, Gwen.
And
Sam,
just to
did you
take a
have,
step,
I think Sam had his hand up. You want to give me an answer, Sam?
I think he did too.
Just a food for thought. A book that I would recommend is and I just lost the title. That's what happens when you get old. Compromise. And someone might be able to fill in the blank, but it's a book in which the author talks about the way that the Christian faith has compromised as it relates to racism, and that the church has been complicit from the very beginning. The Color of Compromise. I will offer you that book where it lays it out.
Read that book. It's very eye-opening too.
Yeah. And as I read it again, I was taken back to my Black church study days and at Duke. That the church had the opportunity to speak out and to be the church and to proclaim the message of God's love, God's universal love for all people. But instead, the church looked at ways that the economic arm and it compromised the gospel. To even push it a little bit further, we had a death in our family in November. It was my first cousin's wife. And we were sitting there at the visitation with masks on. And as I was sitting beside two of my younger cousins of another generation, I was eavesdropping on that conversation. And as I eavesdropped, both of them have attended evangelical churches. And one is even married to an Anglo lady. And they began to talk about Trumpism and how it had affected them in the churches that they had been attending. And one said, well, I'm not going back to that church anymore because it's all about Mr. Trump and all about all that rhetoric that goes with it. And so, to put even another spin on it, as I have talked to some of my churches about racism, they have said that racism is not a problem. And they've even said it's not a problem because they have white friends and anybody is welcome to come to that church. And I'm just, I'm not bold enough as I need to be, but I'm thinking to myself, nobody wants to come to your church. And also the friendship thing doesn't do anything to help with the inequalities that have happened throughout all the centuries. But that's part of the problem. And final thing that I'm gonna say about this is that a few weeks ago, I looked at the special on ABC. On Thursday nights, they had the special for about 3 weeks, Emmett Till. And I also had read the book by Tim Tyson, The Lynching of Emmett Till. Unfortunately, when I look at things like that, and also the murder of George Floyd, I went to DS school right after that. and all the DSs were talking about the books they were reading on racism. I had said I was not going to read any. I needed to read some books on spirituality so that I could learn how to love as God was telling us to love. And I needed to dig deeper into my spiritual being. But unfortunately, I read more books on racism than I have on spirituality at this point. But the point of it is that this is hard work. There are days that I have to walk away from it. I have to do a whole lot of praying. When I'm driving to a church, it's better than a Zoom meeting for the simple fact I can pray and get myself in a spiritual frame of mind in order to deal with what I'm going to have to deal with. And also, as I go to the more rural churches, it's very disheartening. And some of the places that I have to go, I don't want to be there at night, you know. That's just the way it is. But the other fact of the matter is that I'm living in America that seems like maybe it's reverting back to the 50s, 40s, instead of moving towards the 2020s and 2030s. But there is hope. And the hope is in Jesus.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam, for those words. And I've been really appreciative of the conversation that we've had, at least on a cabinet level, with Bishop Ken Carter, where we've tried to emphasize that this work of anti-racism in the church, it has to be about spiritual formation and discipleship. We do this work because we are followers of Jesus. And I think that's getting to some of your question there, Gwen. I know a couple of years ago when we did the book study in the district on racism, spiritual formation, and discipleship, the first reading in that was the Pete Scazzaro lectures on racism, and he really very specifically and very deeply put that into scriptures and into how this is what we do because we're followers of Jesus. I can send you that link, Gwen, if you want to look at that. This has been such a rich conversation, and I am watching our time for this. And I know, Megan, you were going to kind of leave us with some parting thoughts and offer a prayer of blessing for us. And so I'll turn to you now for this, and just want to say thank you to everyone for your participation. We're doing this conversation again tonight at 6:30. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, Sam won't be with us this evening, but we're looking forward to continue conversation with this. Thank you all for being here. Megan?
Yeah, so I don't know how great of words that I'm going to have this morning, because I don't feel like I'm quite on my A game, and I wasn't here for the entire conversation. But as I've heard the conversation that I have heard, I think it's important for everyone in the room to remember that, like, this work is really hard and can sometimes be exhausting. Reverend Moore, I heard you say, like, you just keep going. You don't want to go to those rural places, and like, I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to go to the rural places too. I work in a rural place, and sometimes I'm just utterly appalled in my own context. But I feel like God has placed me here for that very reason, and I feel like we've all been placed in our context for reasons like that. And I remember when I was in grad school, one of my professors said, because when we were talking about kind of race, class, and gender work and racial equity stuff, that's like, it took like 400, 500 years for systems to come into place and continue to work. And it's going to take that long, right, to get those systems systems out of place and the process is slow, but that doesn't mean that it's not unimportant, right? And particularly right now, I think it's more important than ever. And I think that a book like Caste, I always say it wrong, like Caste, I think it sheds light on that history. I think it begins that truth-telling process, and I think it begins to, you know, let us see the humanity and the image of God in one another. So that's kind of what I want to close with. I found a prayer. I was looking in I have this really cool book, but none of the prayers seemed to fit. So instead I went to the UMC discipleship website. They do racial equity prayers every day. And this one isn't actually from today. This one is from January 4th, but I wanted to read it as our closing prayer. So will you hear these words as a prayer? Almighty God, all source of all that is, giver of every good gift, you create all people in your image, and you call us to love one another as you love us. We confess that we have failed to honor you in the great diversity of the human family. We have desired to live in freedom while building walls between ourselves and others. We have been longed to be known and accepted for who we are, while making judgments of others based on the color of skin or the shape of a feature or the varieties of human experience. We have tried to love our neighbors individually, while yet some of us benefiting from the systems that hold those same neighbors in oppression. Forgive us, Holy God. Give us eyes to see you as you are revealed in all people. Strengthen us for the work of reconciliation rooted in love. Restore us in your image to be beloved community, united in our diversity, even as you are one with Christ and the Spirit, holy and undivided Trinity, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day. God's peace to you. Thanks. Sam, thank you. You're muted.
I hope I helped and did not hurt.
No, it was just very powerful. It was, I was just sending you an email. We didn't quite get to the conversations about reparation, affirmative action, and open itinerancy, but I'm gonna keep those in my notes for future conversations. So, so thank you. Thanks for
allowing me to be a part, okay?
I'll see you bright and early in the morning.
Right and early in the morning. And so, you all just got rain down in Albemarle, didn't you?
Yeah, it's been raining. Yeah, y'all got some freezing rain though, I think.
We got freezing rain, and it's on, we got ice on trees. I can look out and see ice on the trees. But
that's what Susan told me. And she said that Forsyth County, that they went ahead and went to school today.
Went to school.
She had to take Hank, and she said it was terrible.
Yeah. And I came to the office and I just drove slowly, but I thought they would have delayed or did something, but they didn't. And Greensboro didn't either, but several of the other systems around did.
Yeah. So I hope everybody's safe. Well, I'll see you in the morning. Take care.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.